Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our That One Play series today, talking about a great one here from the 2008 playoff win at Tennessee, the fumble by Algie Crumpler that kind of kept the Ravens in the driver's seat in that game. But here to talk about that with me is Dan Ibrahimi. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. Thank you so much for having me on again.
It's great. You did a great job the first time. Great to hear your thoughts on this game as well. So kind of lead us in here in terms of where the Ravens were in the season at this point and in the franchise's history, if you want to do that, and whatever made this play important to you.
Absolutely. So obviously, one of the most important Ravens games for anybody who's been a fan for that long. Coming off, I would argue the organization's first huge playoff win since 2000. They had played the Titans earlier in the season and actually lost 13-10. But yeah, this was an incredible game. Winning the turnover battle is really, looking back on it, what the real difference maker was. It certainly wasn't that yards differential where they were outgained, I believe, by something like 170, 180 yards. So that's really what stuck out to me.
Yeah, a lot of similarities between that playoff game in 2008 and 2000 and the one after the 2000 season. Both games, the Ravens did basically nothing offensively. I think they had 5 first downs, might have been 6 in the 2000 game. Is actually played in January 2001, but after the 2008 game, and again, the Titans were the number 1 seed, so very similar in terms of the setup. Similar halftime score was 7-7. Similar yardage differential. The Titans, badly outgained the Ravens, but they also committed 3 turnovers, which kind of cost them the game.
Absolutely. That was the total difference maker, and yeah, like you said, that after the 2000 season, the Ravens only gained 134 yards in that divisional game, which I believe is the second lowest ever by a team who won a playoff game.
Wow, what was the lowest? Yeah,
it was Washington against Tampa Bay after the 2005 season. I think they gained 120 yards and still won. And that may have been the end of Coach Gruden in Tampa.
All right. So now we Ravens season in 2008. I've got to say this ahead of time, and I want you to take us through kind of the Ravens 2008 season. But one of the things that I really love, and I think that fans don't appreciate this enough, is just how few times the Ravens have gone into a season expecting to be terrible. And we didn't really know in 2008. It's one of those rare years where we didn't know if the Ravens would be good. They drafted Flacco. They drafted Rice. They had a pretty good defense, we thought, but they had all those injuries in the secondary the year before. So we didn't really know who they were. If you don't include 2008, the last time we really expected the Ravens to be bad and they delivered on it was 2002. That's the last time. 2015, they had a terrible year, but they were certainly expected to be good after the 2014 season. 2005, I think you would probably say was an expected bad year. I wouldn't have a problem with that if you did, but I think the Ravens were expected to be better. They had come back from just missing the playoffs the year before. But this 2008 team was coming off a bad season in 2007, and they had to try and turn it around in 2008. They had a new coach, and tell us the rest of the story, Dan.
Yeah, so that 2008 season, like you said, it's funny with how well it ended up going, because the expectations really were not very high after that disaster of a 2007 season. But for 2008, really, other than a couple outliers to the Manning brothers, it was 2 heartbreaking losses to the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Week 5 loss to the Tennessee Titans. Other than that, the Ravens totally outperformed expectations. Really, not that many close games.
They did get absolutely destroyed by Indianapolis in a game I'd also like to forget, but we were there, unfortunately, and it was one of the worst games I've ever seen. I think they lost 31-3, right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Right.
that was a forgettable one right after that Tennessee game.
Yeah. And they were 2-3 at that point in the season. Just got beat by Tennessee, but got destroyed by Indianapolis. And I think it's fair to say we still didn't know who this team was.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I don't think many people were expecting the Ravens to go 9-2 the rest of the way. That seemed like it was out of the realm of possibility, and I think you could point to a couple games, but that win over the Eagles with Ed Reed's famous interception return on Kevin Cobb may have been that turning point.
I've heard Harbaugh talk on the topic, and he points to that game at Miami where they went down and they beat him 27-13. It ended with a Suggs interception of a screen pass taking the distance, which was pretty cool. But he points to that game and the ass kicking they gave Miami as really turning the team around. And they went on, I think, about a 4-game winning streak there. I might be even wrong about how long that was, but they were on a winning streak there, and that game at Miami started it. Yeah, Miami, Oakland, Cleveland, and Houston they beat. So not huge, great teams, but they beat them all pretty thoroughly. None by less than 10 points in that stretch, and they had a big comeback against Cleveland 2 weeks later.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, I would definitely agree with the coach on that one. That Miami was the turning point, and that game really was just kind of a precursor for what was to come in the wild card round. Ravens scored 27 points both games, and really just totally held Chad Pennington in check both times.
Yeah, that Dolphins team had close to the fewest turnovers ever in a season, and then they turned it over 4 or 5 times against the Ravens in that game, including I think 4 interceptions by Pennington and a fumble, if I recall.
Yeah, that sounds right. I think that was probably Ed Reed's best playoff game ever in a long list of them.
Yeah. So now they go to Tennessee. Tennessee's a number 1 seed. They had a bye week. We know how much a 14-2 team can always benefit from having a bye week at the end of a regular season from our own history. And what happened?
Absolutely. So the Titans were actually only favored by 3 points, which is kind of wild looking back on it for a 1-6 divisional game. Pretty interesting. I imagine Vegas was looking a little bit at that Week 5 matchup from earlier in the season when setting that line. But this, it was a pretty interesting game. Each team had 2 full drives, using full in air quotes, barely through the first 10 minutes of gameplay, which I thought was pretty amazing. That second Titans drive ended with a Chris Johnson touchdown before he got hurt. That was kind of the story of the first half. I'd argue was Chris Johnson getting hurt, because he managed actually 100 total yards on 12 touches before leaving the game with an injury a little over midway through the second quarter. You could probably argue whether or not it was the right call, but he did rush for 2,000 yards the next year.
Yeah, the CJ2K, there we go. But the thing you'll really notice if you go back and watch the video from that game, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere on YouTube, is that they go back several times in the second half, kind of pretending like Chris Johnson might be playing again, but he's wearing a cape. There's no indication that he's going to be coming back into that game. Weird game in that regard, but so damn similar to the 2000 game in terms of that 7-7 halftime score, the lack of offense by the Ravens, the way they were basically hanging on by a thread in that game. It felt that very similar at Tennessee almost exactly 8 years before. Just a weird game.
Absolutely, and that 7-7 halftime score was truly hanging on by a thread. Lendale White was arguably fairly serviceable for Chris Johnson coming into this game, despite the fumble right before halftime where Jarrett Johnson just absolutely rocked him, and Jim Leonard came in and recovered it. But Lendale White, I believe, had 19 touches for 80 yards. So really, I mean, without that fumble, that's a serviceable backup for sure.
I would say Leonard's game that day, by the way, was one of the greatest ever by a Ravens defender. You could look at a lot of games in terms of Jacoby Jones in the Super Bowl, or maybe a couple of the Flacco games from 2012, or some others on the offensive side. Ray Lewis in the Super Bowl, Jim Leonard there, Ed Reed the week before are 3 of the greatest defensive games ever put in. And Leonard added some icing on the cake with a good punt return in the game that was very key.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to bring up that punt return as well. Yeah, he was huge. Tackle for loss, quarterback hit, forced fumble, fumble recovery, and 5 solo tackles. That'll definitely do it. He was a menace all day.
Yeah, I think he had a pressure, I believe, on one of the balls that was turned over as well, or it might have just been a stop on third down. But it was an unbelievable game from Jim Leonard, and it's not really shocking that Rex Ryan wanted him to run his defense. He was kind of the first iteration of Chuck Clark, if you want to think about that, a guy who had certainly some physical limitations for the position, but was outstanding in terms of knowing where to be at the right time.
I totally agree. And on that Crumpler fumble, the guy he forced it with, Rex Ryan took him along too, and Bart Scott. This, I believe, was the second to last game of both of their Ravens careers.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So, talk about the play itself a little bit. We just set it up maybe in terms of where the Titans were on the field with the score and all that.
Absolutely. So the Titans were absolutely storming down the field. I think everybody will kind of get a little chuckle out of how the drive started. It was a kickoff return by Chris Carr. It was kind of easy to forget him as a key player in that game, but he would obviously come to the Ravens the next year and get a big interception over Tom Brady in that wild card playoff game. But the Titans were actually sort of storming down the field. It was their 10th play of the drive, and they had gained 58 yards going into the play after that Carr return. This one was a pretty big hit. It was coming in. It looked like Algie Crumpler was not quite going to get the first down, but he was pretty close to it, down around the Ravens' 5 yard line, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Bart Scott came in high, Jim Leonard came in low, and the ball sort of just flew out of there. I believe a few Ravens converged on the ball, but the one to ultimately pick it up was Fabian Washington. So go ahead.
There's something else going on here. Is that the Leonard was actually credited with the forced fumble, which is one of the highlights of this game for him. But that Fabian Washington fell on the ball at the 1 yard line, first of all. And then the next guy to come in is Ray Lewis. And it kind of looks like he's trying to take the ball away from him, which he might have been at the bottom of the pile. Ray had some things in his career where he tried to take an interception away from another player and this kind of thing. But what he's also doing is he's providing like the other side of covering that football so that when they unpile people, it's not going to suddenly be a Titan who has it. So you don't just come up to the player and say, oh, well, he's got it. I don't need to jump on the pile. Ray always knew to jump on the pile anyway and try and help cover up that football.
Absolutely. And I actually hadn't even picked up on kind of the psychology of what Ray Lewis was doing there. I honestly thought maybe going for the touchback would have been something that was on his mind with how the Ravens offense was performing that day. I mean, they did end up punting the ball from the 1 yard line, which obviously was not ideal, but that was just a huge sequence for where the game was at that point. The Ravens were winning, but it really felt like if the Titans punched it in there, that game may have had a different result.
Completely agree. So it's 10-7 then. Fumble. Ravens get the ball at the 1 yard line. And I don't remember if they had a 3 and out or if they might have had one first down. It looks like they had the ball. Let's see what happened. They had a false start by Grubbs. No, there was a 3 and out effectively. So no gain with a false start, 2 yard gain, -2, incomplete. And then they had to punt the ball away from their own 1 yard line still. Cook punted it out to the 45. It got returned to the 42. Titans drove for the game-winning field goal. They had one of the most chicken punts of all time in there on 4th and 1. Really strange, I thought, at that point in the game. Dan, take us through that a little bit.
So on that ensuing drive, that was actually to tie from the Titans to tie the game up at 10-10. And yeah, I mean, that was a pretty huge ball spot. Basically, the Titans didn't have to go very far, but Kerry Collins threw it down to Justin Gage, and I don't think he got it, but I think it was really close, and that even if Lendale White hadn't had a great day, I mean, on the 10-yard line, 4th and 1, I think nowadays with the analytics crowd, they definitely would have had a field day with Jeff Fisher's decision to kick it there.
Yeah, and it honestly might have very well set up just another punt from the Ravens 3 plays later if that hadn't worked out. The Ravens, had their difficulties. They had some success, but certainly on that final drive, but they had a lot of difficulties running the football in this game.
Absolutely, absolutely, and really, what was to come next, I think, was pretty much surprising to probably equally Jeff Fisher and John Harbaugh with the Ravens being able to get down into field goal territory.
All right. We've got a big play or two that somebody else will take, but the very memorable pass on 3rd and 2 following the near delay of game that was completed a heap. That was really the big play of that drive. Wasn't the only big play, because the other big play was a 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 11 run, is my recollection, where McGahee ran left. And we've seen them do that a few times. McGahee got 11 yards on that play. Very similar to what happened in the Mile High Miracle game. I think it was also on a 2nd and 10, might have been 2nd and 9 play, where Ray Rice ran for a first down, got pushed by Marshall Yanda for the last little bit in overtime to set up the game-winning score. But very similar in terms of Ravens playoff history.
Absolutely, and the Ravens' longest run of the day. Shockingly, I mean, they got 50 yards on the day, and I think 40% of those yards came on that little drive. So really just kind of underscores how they couldn't move the ball at all that day.
Yeah. All right. Outstanding. Of course, they kicked the field goal. They still have a little bit of time left, and the Titans went out on downs. A 2008 team will always be very special to me. Obviously, it ended the next weekend in Pittsburgh, but they overperformed as much as any Ravens team in terms of expectations. I had big expectations for the 2000 team. You definitely could say they performed at a higher level. I think expectations were very high for the 2012 team. They ended up being not as good, but still won the Super Bowl, meaning not as good as expected in terms of how they dominated foes during the season anyway. But the 2008 team was very special. It was kind of an early arrival of a very good team with if we'd known how important this was at the time, the full early tenure of Flacco's first contract still to enjoy with the cap dollars that come with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely relates a little bit to how I imagine most of us are feeling right now.
All right. We're recording this on 3/14, by the way. Don't know when this is going to air with all draft content and all that coming up soon. So I think that's important that we note that. Dan, always a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to say before we outro here?
No, just thank you so much for having me on. This 08 team was really special to me too. I think the next week with the turnover battle dramatically flipping out of the Ravens' favor leaves a sour memory for some folks, but this game was certainly really special.
They certainly had a chance. They were very close. Like in 14, they were to winning a Super Bowl here. Definitely a team really, frankly, like the 22 team might have been, like the 20 team might have been. If they could have just gotten by that game, then I think their chances were pretty good, because they'd have played Arizona, who made a lot of big mistakes to lose that Super Bowl to Pittsburgh. So anyway, definitely a team that would have had a shot to get it done.
Absolutely.
Dan, really appreciate you coming on and talking about this with us. Tell folks where they can talk football with you.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you again for having me on, Ken. I'm on Twitter at Dre, DRE8820. All
right, outstanding. If you're out there and you'd like to be on That One Play episode, I'd love to hear from you. DMs are always open on Twitter. Send me your idea. I'll respond to you very quickly. I promise you it won't take long to get recording at all. Dan, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.